Hello everyone, welcome to the new video on my channel. Today we are going to be discussing the game played by my student rated above 2000 on Rapid on chess.com. So we are getting really serious. Without further ado, let's jump straight into this great game. Okay, so before we will start, as usual, I will try to say a few things about the rating differences between the 1800 level up to 2000 on Rapid. So I believe that the jump here is much bigger than the previous ones because there are less and less players playing at this level on Rapid. Therefore, it's harder to get the points from somewhere, someone, etc. Therefore, I believe that it's much harder to jump from 1800 up to 2000 than, for example, than 1600 up to 1800. Therefore, also in this game we will see much more significant difference than between the previous two episodes. So that's the basic thought that I wanted to share with you at the very beginning of the video, and with that we can jump into the game. D4 was played, so a little bit different game than the previous episodes. I hope you are happy about it, no more Sicilian. And we are getting a very interesting gambit with the e4 played on the second move. So we haven't discussed this gambit at any time ever with this specific student, therefore he is on his own as early as on the move number 2. Obviously, since we haven't discussed it, at this level you should be confident about your opening repertoire, so if someone offers you a free pawn in the opening, you should take it, right? So we take the pawn, and after knight c3 there is a question how to play next moves, right? So we should try to focus on some healthy developing moves with, if possible, protecting the pawn, asking the opponent whether or not he will be able to take this one from us. So knight f6 seems logical, bishop g5 seems logical, bishop f5 seems logical, so everything is alright as of now. Opponent playing white pieces opted for knight g2 e2 with the idea of jumping to g3 square, putting pressure to f5 and e4, trying to get this pawn back. However, with the correct play, black may be able to keep this pawn advantage. Therefore, instead of doing it that way, white may opt for playing some very sharp line, including the f3 move at this point, or maybe one move later. The main idea of this move is that, okay, we agree as white pieces to be a pawn down, but we will gain significant development advantage. For example, if black decides to take the pawn, we can recapture with either the knight, having the developed knight with the e5 square for it, or with the queen trying to put pressure to the f5 bishop, b7 pawn, and in general to the f file. So in those positions, black may struggle a little bit and be under big pressure. So depending on the style that you are choosing as white, you can opt for either f3 or knight g2 e2, and I would recommend f3. If you gambit a pawn on the move number 2, you should follow up with yet another aggressive approach. Anyway, opponent went for knight g2 e2, and I've said that it may not be enough to recapture the pawn, because after e6 the pawn protects bishop, the bishop protects the pawn, and after knight g3 we have actually two ideas trying to protect this pawn by playing either bishop e7 move. The idea is that after exchange on f6 and taking the pawn on e4, we have the possibility to grab the pawn on d4 thanks to the bishop on f6 attacking it. That's the first thing. The other thing is to try to play bishop b4 move, pinning the knight, therefore yet again defending this pawn. So that's the problem for white, so that we are not defending the pawn really in a very obvious way. We are doing so by some tactical resources that we have, and that's the problem for the opponent. My student went for the bishop e7 move, okay one, and as of now the problem for white is that they don't have a good attacking move. I mean, all the pieces are really pointed out towards the e4 pawn, and so how can we attack it more, right? This bishop has no option to do that, and the queen has an option, but queen is also responsible for defending the d4 pawn. Therefore, we are not sure if we can play this move really. So bishop c4 was played, normal developing move, castle, castle, and at this point I would consider this specific moment as a critical one for my student. And what is a critical moment in general in chess? I believe that we need to be able to define moments in the game that we have to spend more time in. What do I mean? Basically, it doesn't matter if you have 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or an hour for a whole game. There will be moments when you should and have to spend much more time than in the other ones, right? So what are those moments? Those are the critical moments, and usually they happen after the opening. For example, if you know the line ends at some point, then you have to think on your own. It should be the critical moment. In this game, it didn't really apply because you are already lost in terms of your knowledge on the move number 2. So as black, you just accepted the pawn and then continue with the flow of developing moves. At this point, because you took a pawn, you protected the pawn, and you finish the development with castling, now is the time to think, okay, what to do next. Because at this point, you may feel that you are better, you have one more pawn, you protected it enough, so how to then proceed trying to basically win the game, right? So at this point, I believe that the only thing is lacking in the black position is the development of the knight from b8. And with that in mind, we may just try to play knight c6. I believe that after some consideration, this should be the move that comes to mind, mainly because not only we have defended the e4 pawn, but also we are putting the pressure to yet another central pawn, which is d4, and white is really struggling with finding anything against us. The best move perhaps for white would be to exchange on f6 and play d5. We will see more of d5 in the game, so I will not go into the detail why this move is a good one, but thanks to the knight being on c6, we may try to escape from the pressure on those squares and just play knight a5 attacking this bishop, and let's say after a few more exchanges and going away from the d5, letting the rook to go there and pin the queen, we are healthy pawn up with the bishop pair and no struggles at all. And that's why knight c6 should have been considered. My opponent went for the h6 move. It is resolving the situation on the king's side, right? So it's forcing the opponent to take on f6, but the bishop takes f6 move perhaps was coming anyway. So I'm not sure whether should we really push it, right? Knight c6 was much better because you saw that after knight c6 bishop f6 was played anyway, so there was no need to push the bishop to take there. But anyway, it's still an okay move. Yet another alternative that we may consider if we know the threat of d5, which we will see in a second, is the bishop g6 move. What does this move accomplish? Is that it goes away from the pressure of the knight. Therefore, we are just a little bit more solid. So what happens after h6? Takes, and d5. And why is this move a good one? Well, it includes a lot of tactical reasoning behind it, but the biggest thing about it is that as of now, white put a lot of pressure to those two squares. And as of now, we can no longer play bishop g6 because of the double pressure to the e6 square, e6 pawn, and we will lose the pawn that we were up. And we can't really take here because the bishop is hanging, right? And if we can't go back with the bishop, if we can't take on d5, well, what can we do? Or what are the threats from the opponent? So the threat from the opponent is obvious. He wants to take on e6 and then ask the question, how are we going to deal with the pressure to the both e4 and e6 squares when in reality we have only one defender? So in those variations, many times white will just recapture the pawn and at least equal the position. So we want to avoid that. And how to avoid that? Yet again, this is a critical move, not a strategical one as in this moment, but rather a tactical one because we have many options to consider, many candidate moves, and we should try to think about them all. So first of all, this move cannot be totally excluded because, okay, we are hanging the bishop, but we are also attacking the bishop. So we need to consider this move much deeper. So e takes d5 seems okay, bishop takes c3, those are two forcing moves that we always have to include in our thought process. Other moves may be to perhaps get rid of this pawn in an active way. So let's say instead of giving the pawn on e4 in some variations, we may try to push e3, trying to give back the pawn but on our terms. Or the fourth option would be to just play it rook e8, admit that okay, I missed d5, let's just exchange everything on the d file, on e6, on e4 squares, and get a, let's say, around equal endgame with a variation like this perhaps, right? It's totally equal. So those were the four possibilities. Obviously we should start with calculating either bishop takes c3 or it takes d5 first, because those are the forcing moves. Bishop takes c3 seems the most logical move, because with that we are disrupting the white pawn chain, and not only that, we can also play with the queen to f6 because we freed up this square, protecting the f5, protecting the e6, putting pressure to c3. So maybe that was the way to go. However, when you calculate it deeper, after f takes e6, we don't really want to take with the pawn, because okay, we may try to maintain the pawn advantage, but our pawn chain is also a very bad one, so we don't want to risk that with the open b file, open d file, semi-open e file. So instead of doing that, perhaps you would have played there, and yet again you lose this pawn, and the position is around equal, obviously with this one tiny plus for you, which is the bad pawn chain on the queen side, right? However, my student opted for e takes d5, and because he opted for the second most forcing move, we will not discuss the bishop g6 or rook e8 ideas too deep. So, e takes d5. Why can it be played? Well, basically the idea is, as I've said, that even though we are blundering the bishop here, we are attacking the bishop on c4. So after many exchanges, after many variations, if we say, okay, this is playable, we may try to choose this line, right? So now, when you are calculating e takes d5, what moves should you consider? I believe there are yet again many of them, because the most obvious one that we need to calculate is this one. But other than that, white has three more options, which is taking the d5 pawn with either the bishop, the knight, and the queen. If you checked all those lines, kudos to you. You should do that every time that you play such a sharp move. And yeah, how did the game continued? The opponent took with the knight on d5, which I'm not sure about if that's the best move. So basically, we need to start with the most critical one, right? What happens after the bishop is taken? The biggest problem for us is that after we grab the bishop here, obviously we have another alternative, which is this in between move. We will discuss it in a second. In this variation, the problem is that, let's say at this point, we still have one more pawn, but it's this one. So even if the position will be calmed down, etc., we are not sure if we will be able to convert it in the endgame. That's first thing. The other thing is that if we would like to go indeed into the endgame, with the queen exchange, there is an in-between move with check, disrupting our pawn chain, and the idea is that with this active knight, those two files for the white rooks, basically white is the only one who can win this game. And if we cannot play this line, we need to go for the bishop b2 move, and in here there is a crazy line with queen g4 involved. So basically white is just saying, okay, whatever, take this rook, because at this point the pressure to the g7, h6, g file, squares, lines, etc. is so big that black cannot defend themselves. For example, g6 is forced, now knight takes h6. If we go with the king to the h file, the queen will also go to the h file with the threats of some discovered attacks to the king and the queen, for example. So we kind of have to go there, then the knights go back, we only can go back, and after rook d1, which is the point of the variation, we have no good squares to go to. We have a lot of threats, including knight e7, including some, let's say, knight d7, rook d7, queen d7, knight f6 fork, or not only a fork but also a checkmate on h file, etc, etc. So we have too many holes in our position, and those are the dark squared holes against the king. So it means that at this point we should not consider taking the exchange on a1, because the bishop is very important defender of the king. So that's what bought around the d takes c4 variation. However, we can also discuss this one, as I've said. So, okay, we are giving up the defender, which I just now defined as a very important one, but also we are removing the attacker because this knight on e4 was also a big threat to us, right? But the point is that if white recaptures here, after queen g4 we have queen f6 move, defending everything, and we claim 2-pawn advantage. Even though perhaps we will lose at least one of them, we are happy with our king situation, and we exchanged many pieces, so a draw is the least that we can achieve here. Maybe more. So at this point perhaps white should take on d5. It doesn't matter much about the piece which will take it, but let's just consider bishop taking so that white tried to keep the queen on the boards and keep some pressure. We can now grab on b2, and after rook b1 we have c6 move, very important one, trying to yet again kick away the bishop, then exchange the queens and go into, let's say, more or less equal endgame. And with some tricky move like this we cannot take with the rook because the queen is hanging here, 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 here. We should end up in such situation in which we have still one more pawn, and thanks to that we can then perhaps give away this pawn in order to get some activity and draw a game. But as you can see, we are very deep into the variation, and it's white who had to prove that the variation is working. Perhaps therefore knight f5 was not played in the game. Instead, the opponent opted for knight takes d5. I would say that yet again queen takes or bishop takes would be the better moves, mainly because let's say with the bishop takes d5 you put pressure to the b7 square, which is a very important thing in here, and also increasing the pressure to the e4 square. So bishop c8 seems like one of the only moves here, and after let's say a few exchanges yet again we are ending up in a very drawish situation. Perhaps white didn't want it, so that's why he took with knight on d5, but it would be better to take with the knight on f5. I know it's a lot of analysis, and the video will be perhaps the longest one as of now on the channel, but I wanted to point out about not only how should you think in chess at this level and in sharp positions, but also give you the examples of the variations, how deep should you go and how can you evaluate the outcome of those variations. So that's that. Anyway, knight d5 was played. The move is not the best one because as of now the pressure to the e4 pawn is weaker, b7 pawn is also not attacked, so the only problem that we have as black is the f5 bishop, which happily goes back to the g6 square, okay? At this point, white's initiative slowed down a little bit, but obviously it will not be slowed down forever. So white starts with the c3 move, trying to, you know, protect the b2 pawn in that way, and my student opted for knight d7. It's a normal developing move, trying to put yet another defender to the f6 bishop, but perhaps knight c6 could have been also considered. Anyway, knight d7 seems logical. Knight f3 with some nasty trick, but at this level such tricks should not work, and they do not work. Bishop h7 was played, and knight g to h5. White is not stopping the initiative. Actually, all the pieces are placed quite well, so it's a very dynamic position in which we as black are lacking the development and the great squares for our pieces. So our priority should be to exchange some pieces if possible, and if not, just suggest exchanges so that our pieces can activate by doing that. So perhaps the best way to go about it would be to play a move similar to knight e5, and the idea being that if white tries to take the queen, we don't recapture with the rook, because in here, okay, we obtained the pawn advantage, but our pawn structure it's not so great, so we are not sure if we would be able to convert it. So at this point we should just recapture with the bishop, and without the queens on the board our king should feel much safer, and then step by step we would get some activity, right? The bishop is attacked, so we get a tempo there. Then we would move the bishop, for example, here, threatening with the exchange, put the rooks on d and e files, and we should be a healthy pawn up. So that should be the move to consider for sure. Alternatives would be to play I don't know, maybe knight c5, so instead of attacking the bishop on c4, just overprotecting the e4 pawn with the idea of yet again exchanging the queens on d file, or maybe bishop e5 or g5, trying to exchange those knights because they are jumping all over the place, etc, etc. However, my student opted for a6, and I'm really not sure what's that about. And I believe that is one of the small differences between the 2000 player and like 2200, meaning that you cannot ever just play a waiting move if you are not sure what to do. So basically, at this point, because let's say we had so many possibilities and we are not sure about which one is the best one, etc. Also, I forgot to mention that c6 might be a good one because it's taking away the d5 square from white pieces. So yeah, we have all those possibilities, and if you are not sure, if you are low or getting low on time, you are under pressure or something, you might try to play those moves. They are much more often seen at the lower levels, but still even at this point people sometimes play those, and the problem is that the position is such a dynamic one. The threats may not be so direct, but they are coming anyway, like the bishop is well placed, knights are well placed, etc. You should not ever waste a move on a move like a6, because what does it accomplish? Okay, you take away the b5 square, but the bishop was never coming there because he's so happy on this diagonal. That's first thing to consider. The other thing to consider is that, okay, maybe you are trying to prepare a b5 to push away the bishop from this diagonal, but after b5 the bishop just goes back to b3 and still it's on the same diagonal, right? So basically you wasted tempo for nothing. You didn't get any control over the center, you didn't suggest any exchange, any activity and stuff like that, and because of that, just this one small or rather big inaccuracy at this level, the dynamic switches a little bit, and now the white pieces yet again are in a aggressive mode and good mood. You know why? Queen e2 was played, making a place for the rooks to come to the d and e files, and the problem is that our queen is still stuck on d8. So for example, you might try to play queen e7 similarly to queen e2 and then place your rooks there. Fine, but the problem is that now knight d5 may be coming with the pressure to the f6, e7, c7 squares. So that's why I said that the control over the d5 square was very much needed, and that's why queen e7 does not work. If queen e7 does not work, what can you play? I mean, maybe now c6, maybe now knight e5, maybe now bishop e5 and stuff like that, but still, you just lost a tempo, and all those moves from previous time works, but with one tempo less, so not ideal. And my student went for yet another inaccuracy, which is rook e8. It does not seem like a bad move, but with the dynamic position, with this d file open and stuff like that, it's a bad move tactically, because after rook a to d1, we have just growing and growing problems. The pressure to d7 square, d7 knight is no joke. Yet again, queen e7 is met with knight d5, so it's not that clear whether we can play there. And queen c7 that was chosen in the game may be met with queen g4, and as of now, all those threats that have been growing and growing on the board are real ones, and we are not sure if we will be able to survive this. For example, if we agree to the fact that we misplayed few moves and we want to just defend the knight or something, play rook d8, now even the sacrifice might be coming, right? Because if the rook is sacrificed there, there is no other protection of the f6 bishop, and thanks to the pin, we are losing the game on the spot, right? If we agree to say, okay, now we then have to jump with the knight somewhere so that we don't lose the knight, yet again, knight is gone, the bishop is not protected, it might be taken. So even though now the variation grows in the branches because the tree is growing, king h8, exchange queens and stuff like that, and in here it's a critical moment for white, they are just choosing in which way they would like to punish us for misplaying the position, and they are choosing between receiving a good position versus a great one. So they can try to take here, they can try to just go away with the bishop, or maybe take there, or maybe find the best move, which is bishop d5. I will just show it for the display purposes, but obviously during the game it may be very much difficult to calculate this. So basically, if let's say we took on h7, the idea is that black is one piece down, but this knight is not going anywhere, so in that way black is fine at least. But with bishop d5 in between move, the idea is that the knight cannot be taken yet because of the bishop b7 threat. And after c6, now we can grab the h7 bishop, with the idea that at this point white took an additional pawn on d5 and opened the d file for the rook, etc. Therefore the position might be much better than this previous one. Okay, so that was the small difference, but anyway, the idea is that in general at this point just queen g4 is allowed, possible, working, and crashing. So that's possible mainly because we've played one mistake, one inaccuracy, and now we are in a big trouble, even though computer evaluates it like, okay, we can still do it. It's a no joke of a problem. So queen c8 is a move that I will not consider a mistake or a blunder, but it's just on the verge of losing the game. However, the opponent rushed a little bit too fast and played a move rook takes d7 immediately. So instead of putting more pressure to the d7, f6 squares and the king with queen g4 move, which would be, as I've said, nearly winning, he opted for sacrificing something. And at this level, it's nothing new basically. So I would say yet another difference between 1800 and the 2000 rated player is that the sacrifices are seen much more often because players know the dynamic of chess much better and they know when they can try this. So at this point, even though it's not the greatest of choice objectively, it's still a very nice try in the practical game. So then rook is sacrificed in order to disrupt the pawn chain again around the black king. And as I've said, practically it's a very nice decision. However, now white needs to prove that, okay, I got this and I know how to continue putting the pressure to the opponent. And the move to do that would be queen h5. In that way, we are putting immediate pressure to the h6 square. Also, we are looking towards the f7 square, and in that way, then with the rook d1, because queen protects the d1 square, we may try to create some real threats around the black king. White went for rook d1 immediately, and then after queen f5 we cover those squares, we cover this one, etc. So also we attack the knight getting a tempo, and that's why rook to d1 move was in an inaccuracy, because we've gained a tempo helping us to put the queen to a better spot in order to defend our king. So that's that. King g7 was played so that we go away from the pin perfectly. Rook d5, very nice choice. Yet again asking the queen a question, where would you like to go? We would like to also, as white, regain the control over the h5 square, trying to make it work for our attack. Therefore, a very, very important move for black was the rook e5, just not allowing the opponent to get the control over this square and the white squares in general. And with that move, I would consider this position as still not so clear, however, going into the right direction, you know, because we cover h5, we cover d7 square, our king is not under any pin. The biggest problems we have is that perhaps this bishop is out of play, but slowly we would perhaps, and slowly but steadily, we would go away from all the problems and win this game. But my student didn't either find this move or didn't want to play this move, and he played queen c8, giving up the h5 square. And the idea that both players missed, and I thought that at the very beginning that's what white was aiming for in general, was to try to place not queen on h5 but rather knight on h5 sometimes, so that the f6 pawn is attacked, because sometimes black is lacking the possibility to defend this pawn. So in the game, after the queen c8 move, knight h5 might have been played, and going up with the king is usually a suicide. So even though I don't see immediate checkmate as of now, it cannot work ever basically in the practical game. And after king goes down, then the knight f6 is coming, grabbing the pawn, putting pressure to more squares around the king, opening up the diagonal, etc. So white's attack is growing instantly. that's why queen c8 was a mistake, and that's what white also have missed, because he placed queen on h5. And even though I've said about this move before, so it's not a bad one, it just misses the opportunity to really, create a big threat. At this point, bishop g6 was played, a very nice move. The idea is that the bishop comes to play, tries to defend its king. And the problem with the move like this is that, okay, our king might be considered as a weak one because we have moved all our pawns. However, white is lacking the time to really put pressure to our 7th rank or any other square. So for example, after queen goes somewhere, let's say e2, we can push c6, play queen c7, rook d8, exchange something, and then slowly but steadily it again win the game, because as of now this structure is not as bad as it may seem. So after bishop g6, white cannot play this move, and he goes for queen h4 move. And as you can see, those two moves did not accomplish much, while knight h5 check, one move before, would be much better. Anyway, at this point, it's still not so clear for us how to continue, and I consider the move chosen by my student as a good one, but objectively speaking, yet again from the computer perspective, it's not the greatest. Rook e5, why is it a good one? From the psychological point of view, if we as white this time try to attack the opponent, we really don't want to exchange pieces, right? Because the more pieces are on the board, the more threats we can create. So rook e5 accomplishes one important thing, which is the control over the 5th rank, right? And the h5 square particularly. Better late than never. So rook e5 should have been played 2 moves back. In here it's also a fine decision logically, strategically, but it's not really working tactically. But yet again, I've said, it's from the computer's perspective. From the human perspective, it's hard to even start considering such move as white, because the move that may have claimed the drawing chances is rook takes e5, because the idea is that because we need to recapture with the pawn, we open up this diagonal for the queen, and after further exchanges, not only white may try to play a move like this, trying to give either perpetual or some other stuff, but also he can take on e4, threatening here, and in here actually, because the pawns are moved and we have the f7 pawn missing, the king is actually not in danger as of, losing the game, but in danger because we perhaps will never be able to really push the initiative forward with such weak king, and that's where and how white could have tried to draw a game. However, it's not so clear. Computer says, okay, it's a draw, but looking at the material, white is just an exchange down, so it's not easy to, first of all, consider this line, second of all, go for it. So as I've said, from the human standpoint, rook e5 was a desired move and a good one, even though it's not really working. Anyway, white continued with, let's say, human way, going for some exchanges with knight h5, because there is not much else that can be done here. If no rook takes e5, with the ideas that I've just shown, if not going back with the rook to the d2 or d1 squares, like what else can you do, right? Your attack is basically finished. So that's why knight h5 was played, after which we exchanged a lot. And finally, we can, take a deep breath in and be happy about our situation, because, alright, our king is still not the greatest, but simply after defending the f7 pawn, we should be able to win the game, convert the endgame in not an easy way, but relatively easy, because at this point, if we think about our king, actually it's much safer than in this endgame, right? So it may seem counterintuitive, so yet again, that's why the variation was hard to spot from the white's perspective, but the idea is that in here, king has much more options to hide around his pawns, and with the other variation, king had nowhere to hide. So at this point, we are healthy exchange up. We control the dark squares, so we can go there with the queen on e5, on g5, and stuff like that. So after this point, there is not much to analyze. All I will just say is that because it's a rapid game, I went into the analysis way deeper than the players did, because they just didn't have time for it. I'm talking for more than half an hour, which is amazing. actually. But anyway, I wanted to point that out because you may you may deduce that they are low on time, and they are indeed. So my student had a problem because at this point, even though he had clearly a winning endgame, he had less than like half a minute on the clock. So he was mostly pre-moving, and as you may see already, the result is a draw, mostly because he was just lacking the time to deliver the ladder checkmate, the one that we all like, know, and try to do at from the lowest levels of chess. But yeah, I will just fast forward it. So basically, the idea is that even though my student had a queen, he wasn't able to convert. Why? Because he went for the pre-moves with the queen being up. So that's the trick also for the beginners. If you want to deliver the ladder checkmate when in time trouble, always make sure that the rook is facing the king. What I mean is that at this point, when you promote the queen, you should start with the move like queen a3 and then do the ladder like this, so that the rook is the first piece touching the king, and it cannot ever be taken because the queen will always protect it, right? If you go the other way around, if you have like 1 second on the clock and you pre-move, you may end up drawing a game like this. So just a funny stuff at the very beginning. Wanted to show you that. But outside of that, obviously, the bigger things happened at the very early stages of the game. And I chose this one particularly because my student was met with something new. Then he had to react against it. And he did that properly with developing healthy moves, but also he used a lot of time for it, I guess. So that's why he was lacking time to convert the endgame. But obviously, in the longer time control, perhaps he would be able to easily win. And what I want you to take away from this game, from this lesson, is that at this level you should try to, and not only at this level, at the lower levels also, you should try to define the critical moments in the game, both strategically as in here as the tactical ones around here and maybe in some other places during the game, so that you know where to focus, when to focus, and in that way you are optimizing your time being spent in the most important moments. And that's why, and that's how you may improve your results and your overall play. So that's the lesson I wanted you to learn. As you can see, I went much deeper into the analysis than in the previous episodes, because I believe this is the level that requires to do so, because basically you have some repertoire, you know what's going on in chess in general, you may just be lacking the decision making properly, evaluation of the position strategically, or calculation skills are not in place. So that's what you should be looking for at this very level. We'll see more of that in the next video, the last one of the series, in which I will be commenting on the game played by 2200 rated players, so even deeper, I guess, but I hope to not bore you so much as today, because we are hitting the 40-minute mark. So I guess I will end that video around here, even without going into the outro as usual, because I said what I wanted to say anyway, all of the lessons and stuff like that. So if you appreciate the time I just spent explaining all the stuff to you, please leave a like and comment, I will appreciate it. Subscribe if you wish to see more materials like that, and we'll see each other in the next 2 or 3 days in the next video. So thank you a lot, and see you soon.